Hello, today we're going to explore a chilling story centered around an abandoned house that has long been rumored to be haunted in the village of Ping Shek in northern Hong Kong. The house, now in ruins and covered in wild weeds, stands out awkwardly against the backdrop of its surroundings. According to local rumors, strange and unexplainable events often occur in the area around the house, leaving people with an eerie sense of dread. A few curious thrill-seekers have risked venturing inside, capturing numerous photographs and sharing them online. Partially open windows, shattered furniture coated in thick dust, all of it seems to silently tell the story of a life that once existed there, and of a horrific crime long buried by time. That has suddenly become the subject of growing speculation. So what really happened inside that abandoned house? Next, let's turn back the clock to July 6, 2009. It was a hot Monday in the middle of summer. That afternoon, inside the finance office at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, an employee was calling his colleague, Dam Zhonghui, for the third time, but still, no one picked up. The two had arranged to meet that morning to go over some financial reports and discuss work matters. But by midday, Dam Zhonghui still hadn't shown up, and no one knew why. As a veteran staff member with 22 years of service, he had never once been late or absent without notifying someone. Feeling concerned, the co-worker decided to call the company where Dam Zhonghui's wife worked, only to find out that she hadn't shown up for work that day either. That's when the unease really began to set in. By 2 p.m., Dan Zhongdo's phone finally rang through, but the person who answered wasn't him. It was his cousin. The cousin explained that Dan Zhonghui had taken his wife and child on a trip to Dongguan and wouldn't be returning anytime soon. For the time being, he said. He was holding onto the phone. After hanging up the phone, the co-worker couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Dan Zhonghui had always been a responsible employee. He never took unannounced absences. Even when planning a vacation, he would always notify the office well in advance. But this time, everything felt wrong, with a growing sense of unease and an instinct that something might be terribly wrong. The co-worker decided to call the police. At 3 p.m., officers arrived at Dan Zhonghui's home in Ping the village to check on the situation. The house stood along Ango Shou Road, a self-built structure covering about 450 square meters. Made from metal sheets and asbestos roofing, a large courtyard in front was filled with flowers and ornamental plants. At the time, Dan Zhonghui was 44 years old. His wife, Tong Yan Yi, was 34. They had 2 daughters, Dam Siu Man, age 10, and Dam Siu Wing, age 7. Both were still in elementary school. The land had been passed down from Dam Zhonghui's father. It was originally a pig farm, but after getting married, he had converted it into a family home and moved in with his wife and kids. They had even taken in a few stray dogs. When the police arrived, the front door was locked tight. A nearby elderly woman told them that the day before, there had been a heavy storm with thunder and lightning. She had heard a terrifying scream during the downpour, but the rain was so loud she couldn't make out what had happened. The elderly woman said Dan Zhonghui and his wife were kind people who often helped her out. Their daughters were polite and well-behaved. The couple had stable jobs and lived a quiet life without any apparent conflicts. They had a cousin who visited frequently and whom they trusted deeply, so much so that they had even given him a spare key and sometimes asked him to look after the dogs. When asked whether the family had gone on vacation, the elderly woman said she wasn't aware of any such trip. After asking around, the police eventually found Dan Zhonghui's cousin living in a rented unit just a few hundred meters away on Ango Shou Road. His name was Su Shenqi, a 42-year-old man originally from mainland China. When the police found Su Shenqi, he was just about to head out on a 3-wheeled vehicle, loaded with various items like a video camera, a gaming console, and other belongings. He explained that he was planning to take the items to a second-hand market to sell them. When questioned about the whereabouts of Dan Zhonghui, Su Shenqi claimed that the entire family had gone on vacation, but the police weren't buying it. Even if the family had gone on a trip, There was no logical reason for them to hand over their phones to someone else. Suspicious that Su Shenki might be connected to Dam Zhonghui's disappearance, the police conducted a search on him and discovered several bank cards. Upon checking, they found that the cards belonged to Dam Zhonghui himself. According to the bank's records, on July 5th, Su Shenki had made multiple attempts to withdraw money using his cousin's cards, but failed every time due to entering the wrong PIN. Su Shenki explained that the Dam Zhonghui family had gone on a trip to mainland China, and because they didn't want to incur expensive international roaming fees, they had left their phone with him. As for the bank cards, he claimed Dam Zhonghui had given them to him before leaving, telling him he could withdraw money if needed. However, he said he couldn't remember the correct PIN, which is why the withdrawals failed. Although Su Shenki's explanation sounded plausible, the police wanted to be certain. They asked him to take them to Dam Zhonghui's house. At first, Su Shenki repeatedly denied having a spare key, but under increasing pressure from investigators, he finally gave in and reluctantly handed over the key. They quickly arrived at the house. As soon as they pushed the door open and stepped inside, a strong metallic stench, clearly the smell of blood, hit them in the face. The living room was a mess. Items scattered across the floor, and the furniture on the table had been disturbed. In the kitchen, there were unfinished meals and unwashed dishes still left in the sink. Shortly after entering the house, police officers discovered the ID cards and passports of both Dam Zhonghui and his wife in the bedroom. They also found bloodstains on the wall and the refrigerator. A deep sense of dread began to settle in. The officers immediately checked the couple's immigration records and confirmed that neither of them had left Hong Kong. Moreover, even though it was summer break, their two young daughters were still attending extra classes, making it unlikely they had gone on vacation with their parents. At this point, Su Shenki's lies completely unraveled. It was clear that something far more sinister had taken place. The case was no longer treated as a missing persons report. It was now officially classified as a homicide investigation. Police quickly sealed off the crime scene and brought in sniffer dogs to search the entire property. Eventually, they discovered something suspicious on the concrete floor outside in the yard. However, since night had already fallen, the forensic investigation had to be temporarily paused. Meanwhile, Su Shenki, now the prime suspect, was taken to the station for further questioning. The next morning, the excavation began. Police had initially requested help from the fire department, but the concrete in the yard proved too thick and solid for their tools to break through. They were forced to bring in a construction team for assistance. After considerable effort, the team managed to break through the cement and began digging deeper. Not long after, strands of human hair were discovered beneath the soil. The workers recoiled in shock, overwhelmed by a sense of dread. Many of them refused to continue. Taking over, the police resumed the digging, and what they uncovered was horrifying. Buried beneath the concrete were the bodies of the entire Dam Zhonghui family. They had been stacked on top of one another, each of them wearing only shorts and light shirts. At the very bottom of the pile lay Dam Zhonghui, 44 years old. His body was covered in injuries, and his face was so badly disfigured that he was nearly unrecognizable. Above him was his wife, Tang Anyi, aged 34. Her hands and feet had been bound with electrical wires, and her mouth and nose were sealed with duct tape. A length of electrical cord had been wrapped tightly around her neck. On top were their two young daughters, just 10 and 7 years old. Their limbs were also bound with electrical wire, and their faces taped in the same way. Tragically, the younger girl's head had been covered with a fuzzy plastic bag. The loving family of 4 had been completely destroyed, brutally taken from the world in the most heart-wrenching way imaginable. The burial pit measured approximately 24 meters long and 18 meters deep. From what investigators could observe at the scene, aside from the visible injuries on Dam Zhonghui's body, the other 3 victims showed no significant external wounds. This raised a chilling possibility, one that couldn't be ruled out. They may have been buried alive. The autopsy revealed that Dam Jonghui had suffered a total of 65 wounds on his body, including 13 defensive injuries on his arms and legs. The cause of death was determined to be massive blood loss. As for the other 3 victims, they died from suffocation. Investigators concluded that the time of death for all 4 was around midday on July 5th. Meanwhile, after learning that the bodies of the Dam family had been discovered, Su Shenki finally broke down under the weight of psychological pressure. He burst into tears and confessed to the entire crime. Su claimed that he had acted in a moment of rage and insisted that he never intended to kill anyone. Su Shenki used to work as a motorcycle taxi driver in his hometown in Guangdong, barely getting by on a meager income. But as time went on, business became increasingly difficult, and his earnings were no longer enough to support his family. Feeling desperate, Su thought of his cousin, Dan Zhonghui, who lived in Hong Kong, and reached out to ask if he could help him find a job. Dan Zhonghui was a kind-hearted man. When he heard that his cousin was struggling, he didn't hesitate to help. He quickly arranged a construction job for Su Shenki. However, it wasn't long before Su quit without warning. He felt the work was too exhausting and the pay too low. Without saying a word to Dan Zhonghui, Su Shenki quietly returned to Guangdong on his own, with no special skills to offer. Su Shenki found himself struggling once again after returning to Guangdong. He couldn't find a suitable job, and before long, he was back in financial trouble. Left with no other option, he reached out to Dan Zhonghui once more, hoping for help. Instead of blaming Su for disappearing without a word last time, Dan remained generous and understanding. He promised to help again and even said that if no job could be found, he would personally hire Su to do some home renovations. Paying him HKD 200 a day, Su Shenki agreed and returned to Hong Kong. From then on, he spent most of his time helping Dan Zhonghui renovate the house, occasionally taking on side jobs elsewhere. According to Su's later confession, he developed romantic feelings for his cousin's wife, Tang Enyi. He claimed that whenever Dan Zhonghui was away, the two secretly met and began an affair. Over time, it seemed Dan began to suspect something was wrong. Eventually, he came up with an excuse to ask Su to move out. On July 6th, the day of the crime, it was a Sunday, and Dan Zhonghui had the day off. He used the time to visit his mother at a nursing home. Seeing that Dan was away, Su Shenki went to the family's home to meet Tang Enyi. Just as the two were getting intimate, Dan unexpectedly returned earlier than planned. What he saw shocked and enraged him. Overcome with fury, Dan launched at Su, and the two men began to fight violently. Although Dan Zhonghui was in his 40s and had gained some weight, he still held a clear advantage in terms of strength. Su Shenki quickly found himself overpowered. Realizing that Dan had no intention of backing down, Su, in a moment of panic and rage, grabbed a fruit knife from the table to defend himself. As the struggle intensified, his mind went completely blank. It wasn't until Dan collapsed onto the floor that Su finally realized he had just committed murder. Tang Enyi witnessed the horrific scene and screamed in terror, instinctively reaching for her phone to call the police. Panicking, Su Shenki rushed to silence her, afraid that someone might hear her cry for help. But Tang Enyi couldn't stay calm. She fought back with all her strength. Struggling desperately to reach her phone, Su later confessed that he lost control in that moment. In a frenzy, he grabbed duct tape to muffle her and used electrical cords to bind her hands and feet. Yet she continued to resist. Feeling helpless and overwhelmed, Su finally wrapped the cord around her neck and strangled her. Just then, the two daughters, startled by the noise, ran out of their room. The horrifying sight before them made them scream in fear, not knowing what to do. Frightened, the girls quickly turned back and locked themselves in their bedroom. Outside, the heavy rain drowned out their cries. After killing Tang Enyi, Su Shenki realized there was no turning back. In his twisted reasoning, he decided to eliminate all witnesses. Grabbing tools near the door, he entered the girls' room, tied their hands and feet with electrical cords, and sealed their mouths and noses with duct tape until they stopped breathing. After committing the crime, Su Shenki ran back to his rented room just a few hundred meters away. He lay awake all night, haunted by what he had done and desperately trying to figure out how to deal with the bodies. By morning, a gruesome plan formed in his mind. He would dig a grave. The next day, he found a shovel and dug a large hole right in front of the dam. Family's home. Then, one by one, he dumped all 4 bodies into it. After the burial, Su became anxious that the summer heat might cause the smell of decomposition to rise through the soil. To cover it up, he went out and bought cement, then poured a thick layer over the grave to mask any odor and evidence. He buried the murder weapon in a separate hole and carefully cleaned up the crime scene in an attempt to erase all traces of his brutality. Meanwhile, Su Shenki was bombarded with calls on Dan Zhonghui's phone. Feeling the pressure mounting, he eventually picked up and lied, saying the entire Dam family had gone on a trip to mainland China. But the truth would not stay hidden for long. Based on Su's confession, police later uncovered key pieces of evidence buried near the front of Dan Zhonghui's home, including the fruit knife, shovel, electric cords, and other tools used in the crime. With a full set of physical evidence in hand, authorities officially arrested Su Shenki on charges of murder. Once exposed, the case sent shockwaves through the public. Outpourings of sympathy flooded in for the Dam family, especially for the innocent children whose lives were cut short. Many compared the case to a real-life version of the fable, The Farmer and the Snake, a tale of kindness repaid with betrayal. But one chilling question remains. Was Su Shenki's confession the full truth, or was there more hidden beneath the surface? A longtime friend of Dan Zhonghui told the police that the couple had been married for over a decade and always appeared to have a harmonious relationship. They were well liked in the neighborhood and seen as a model husband and wife. Moreover, Dan Zhonghui was known to be well educated and in his younger years, notably more handsome than Su Shenki, who was considered average-looking and lacked any real talents. Given this, many questioned the motive behind the alleged affair. People began to wonder, why would Tan Enyi fall for someone like Su Shenki? It didn't add up. This led to growing suspicion that Su's claim of a romantic relationship might have been a fabricated story, a desperate lie to shift blame and reduce the weight of his punishment. Under mounting pressure from police questioning, Su Shenki changed his story. He admitted that Duong Enyi had never returned his affections. The entire relationship had been one-sided. He claimed he had long admired her gentle nature and domestic charm, calling her his ideal type. Despite being repeatedly rejected, Su refused to give up. Instead, his obsession grew stronger. He confessed that whenever Dan Zhonghui was away, he would deliberately find excuses to be alone with Duong Enyi and attempted to force himself on her. Each rejection wounded his pride, but rather than stopping, he continued his unwanted advances, fixated on a fantasy that never truly existed. This behavior infuriated Tan Enyi. She eventually told her husband everything. Upon hearing the truth, Dan Zhonghui was outraged, furious, and betrayed. He lashed out at Su Shenki, calling him an ungrateful snake and declaring he wanted nothing more to do with him. Realizing the gravity of what he had done, Su tried to make amends. A few days later, he shamelessly showed up at Dan Zhonghui's home. Begging for forgiveness, he swore it would never happen again and pleaded for another chance. Touched by what seemed like sincere remorse, Dan Zhonghui finally relented and chose to forgive him. One day before the tragic incident, Su Shenki learned that Dan Zhonghui would be away visiting his elderly mother at the nursing home. Seizing the opportunity, Su went to their home, hoping to speak with Tang Enyi. This time, he claimed he had no ill intentions. He simply wanted to apologize for everything. Unexpectedly, Dan Zhonghui returned earlier than expected. The moment he saw Su Shenki alone with his wife, his rage flared up once more. Without a word, he charged at Su, and the two began to fight violently. That confrontation would become the turning point, leading directly to the unspeakable tragedy that followed. Su Shenki's statement sounded reasonable at first, but after conducting an investigation, the police discovered that this was not a case of impulsive murder, but a premeditated crime. Dam Jonghui had as many as 65 wounds on his body, causing that many injuries would have taken a certain amount of time if Su Shenki's testimony was true and Tang Yi had been standing right there. Then she should have had enough time to either escape or call for help. The fruit knife that Su Shenki used to commit the crime did not belong to the Dam family. It was his own. It was later found among a collection of items he intended to sell at a second-hand market. These items were later confirmed to be the property of Dam Jonghui's family. All of this evidence indicates that Su Shenki brought the weapon with him to the Dam household beforehand. Rather than acting on a sudden impulse, his motive for the crime was money. Faced with increasingly clear evidence, Su Shenki finally confessed the truth. He said that back when he was working in Guangdong, his income was very low and his entire family depended on him. His 2 children cost a lot of money each year, so he ended up borrowing from many people. Over time, his friends began to avoid him, and no one wanted to be involved with him anymore. At his wit's end, he turned to his cousin in Hong Kong for help. At first, he believed his cousin was a kind person, but to his surprise, the job he was offered was grueling construction work. With a daily wage of only 230 Hong Kong dollars, the work was exhausting and the pay was minimal. What's more, after working for some time, he discovered that the standard wage at construction sites in Hong Kong was actually 500 Hong Kong dollars a day. He began to suspect that his cousin had been skimming money off his pay. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. Feeling used and betrayed, he angrily returned to Guangdong in a fit of frustration after returning home. He still couldn't find a job under the pressure of daily life. He once again contacted Dam Jonghui. Dam Jonghui offered him a job helping to renovate his house. With a wage of 200 Hong Kong dollars per day, desperate and broke, he had no choice but to accept and return to Hong Kong. Dam Jonghui asked his wife to prepare a room for Su Shenki to stay in. Gradually, Su Shenki realized that his cousin's family lived with all the comforts and a prosperous lifestyle. In contrast, he himself struggled to get by on a meager salary. The gap and dissatisfaction inside him grew deeper and deeper. What made him even more uncomfortable was the cold attitude of his sister-in-law, Tang Yi. She seemed to deliberately avoid him, making him feel uneasy and wanting to move out and live separately. While living in Hong Kong, Su Shenki's house back in his hometown suddenly collapsed, requiring a large sum of money to rebuild. Therefore, he planned to borrow 100,000 Hong Kong dollars from his cousin. He quietly calculated that if his cousin refused, he would resort to stronger measures. That morning, Su Shenki took a fruit paring knife from his boarding house, hid it under his shirt, and went to Dan Jonghui's house. At that time, Dan Jonghui had gone to the nursing home. Su Shenki waited in the living room. After a while, near noon, his cousin returned home, and his sister-in-law went into the kitchen to cook. Then, Su Shenki got straight to the point and talked about borrowing money. Dan Jonghui didn't refuse and said he would try to help. But when he heard Su Shenki wanted to borrow 100,000 Hong Kong dollars, he felt a bit awkward and frankly said that he couldn't come up with such a large amount of money all at once. Although he and his wife both had stable jobs, a few years ago his mother fell ill, which drained a lot of their savings. Currently, with 2 daughters at school age, the family expenses were significant, so he suggested Su Shenki think of other solutions. To Su Shenki, these words were just an excuse. Because his cousin refused to lend him money, he decided to turn against him. He stood up, angrily calling his cousin two-faced, saying he wouldn't even spare his own family. He had skimmed money when introducing him to a job, and now he refused to lend 100,000 Hong Kong dollars, truly heartless. Su Shenki became more and more agitated, spewing non-stop harsh words. Dam Jonghui grew angry and shouted at him to get out. The two exchanged heated words and began to argue. At that moment, heavy rain poured down with thunder rumbling. In the kitchen, Tang Yi was busy cooking, the sizzling sound of oil in the pan completely drowning out the argument happening in the living room. The argument between Su Shenki and Dam Jonghui quickly escalated into a physical altercation. With a clear advantage in size and strength, Dam Jonghui managed to overpower Hua Shenki in no time. However, just as Dam Jonghui turned his back, Hua Shenki suddenly pulled out a small fruit knife he had hidden in his jacket. In a fit of rage, he lunged at his cousin. The sudden attack left Dam Jonghui in shock and unable to defend himself. At this point, Hua Shenki had completely lost control. Driven by emotion, he continued his assault until Dam Jonghui stopped moving. Tang Anyi had just finished cooking and stepped into the living room, only to be confronted with a horrifying scene. Her scream pierced the air. In a sudden, unhinged state, Su Shenki charged at her like a wild animal before she could react. He tied her hands and feet with a power cord and covered her mouth and nose with tape to keep her silent. Then, using a similar method, he restrained her two daughters. Once sure no one could intervene, Su Shenki began rummaging through the house, searching for money. In the end, he found only 6,000 Hong Kong dollars in cash and a few bank cards. Su Shenki forced Tang Anyi to reveal the pins for the bank cards, then rushed to the bank to withdraw money. But after several failed attempts, he realized something was wrong. The codes weren't working. Only then did it hit him. Tang Anyi had given him the wrong passwords. Furious, he returned to the Tang Anyi family home, but to his shock, when he got back, he found that Tang Anyi and her two daughters were no longer breathing. By this point, Su Shenki was completely exhausted. Seeing the freshly cooked food in the kitchen, he figured it wouldn't hurt to eat. He sat down and devoured the meal without hesitation. With his hunger satisfied, his thoughts turned grim. He needed to figure out what to do next. After some consideration, he decided that hiding the evidence would be the safest option. So, he grabbed a shovel and dug a large hole in front of the house. One by one, he carefully buried the victims. Then he spent hours cleaning up the scene. It wasn't until around 9 p.m. that he finally finished. Afterward, Su Shenki returned to his rented room and fell into a deep sleep. The next day, Su Shenki realized the bodies would start to smell, so he bought some cement to cover them up. Meanwhile, Dam Jonghui's phone kept ringing nonstop. It wasn't until he was almost done that Su Shenki finally answered the call. On the other end, a coworker was looking for Dam Jonghui. Su Shenki understood that it was only a matter of time before everything came to light. He had to leave Hong Kong before the police arrived. Before leaving, Su Shenki tried to make a little extra cash by taking Dam Jonghui's belongings to a second-hand market to sell. But unexpectedly, the police showed up much sooner than he thought. 1 year after the crime, the trial of Su Shenki began at the Hong Kong Supreme Court. The defendant, Su Shenki, was charged with 4 counts of murder. During the trial, the prosecutor argued that Su Shenki, driven by greed, had killed the entire Dam Jonghui family. He then buried the 4 victims to cover up the crime. The method was ruthless, showing no remorse or regret. The prosecutor demanded a life sentence for the defendant. The defense lawyer argued that Su Shenki had conflicts with the victims. When his request to borrow money was denied, he became extremely angry. Eventually, losing control of his emotions led to his extreme actions. He was only worried that the victims' screams would attract attention, so he restrained them with power cords and tape, not intending to cause their deaths. Therefore, the defense claimed he should not be convicted of murder. On the other side, the prosecutor rebutted that Tang Anyi's neck showed clear signs of being tightly bound with a power cord, leaving deep marks. This contradicted the defendant's testimony. The 2 victims, Dam Shou-1 and Dam Zhou-Ying, were found with transparent tape sealed over their mouths and noses, clearly indicating death by suffocation. Additionally, Dam Zhou-Ying's head was covered with a plastic bag. Therefore, the prosecutor insisted that Su Shenki be convicted of murder. To further verify the cause of death of Tang Anyi and her 2 daughters, the court ordered another forensic examination. The results showed that Tang Anyi and Dam Zhou-Ying died from mechanical asphyxiation, while Dam Xiaowin died from accidental suffocation. After a period of trial, the jury reached their verdict. The court declared that the defendant, Su Shenki, was guilty of 3 counts of murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment. For one count of manslaughter, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Facing this sentence, Sushenki changed his testimony, claiming that his original statement was the truth. He and his sister-in-law had feelings for each other. After being discovered by Dam Jonghui, he accidentally killed him. As for taking belongings from the Dam Jonghui household, he said it was to keep as mementos. He accused the police of using harsh interrogation methods. Whenever he showed any resistance, they would beat him and even deny him water. Under both physical and psychological pressure, he was forced to confess. The judge stated that Sushenki's testimony was hard to believe. In an attempt to avoid punishment, he kept changing his story and even didn't hesitate to slander his sister-in-law. His crimes were truly despicable. In the end, Sushenki was transferred to Stanley Prison to serve his sentence. Many believed this was a fitting conclusion and that justice had been served. Reporters investigated and found that the construction job Dam Jonghui recommended to Sushenki paid exactly 230 Hong Kong dollars a day. He had not skimmed any money. This showed that Sushenki's resentment stemmed from dissatisfaction with his own life, which led to jealousy and hostility toward the Dam Jonghui family. After the case, many people voluntarily visited the Dam family's home, donating money to help cover the funeral expenses. The stray dogs that Dam Jonghui and his wife used to care for were also taken in by kind-hearted individuals. Time passed, and the house in the village of Bingsha gradually became overgrown with weeds. The home, once filled with happiness and warmth, was now nothing but crumbling walls silently telling the story of the tragedy that occurred there. Whenever it rained, locals nearby often heard faint cries coming from the house, sending chills down their spines. The old photos left hanging on the walls seemed almost alive. Whenever someone approached, the faces in the pictures appeared to shift into strange expressions, giving anyone nearby an eerie feeling. Strange phenomena continued to occur, making the abandoned house even more eerie. No one dared to go near it. The horrific massacre slowly faded into obscurity until 2016, when a group of thrill-seekers broke into the house and posted photos online. Suddenly, the long-buried case sparked public outrage once again. People felt both sorrow and renewed fear from the mysterious rumors surrounding the abandoned house. In August 2022, the Hong Kong Correctional Services announced that a 55-year-old male inmate at Stanley Prison had died of illness. Many speculated that this individual was Sushenki, the man responsible for the crimes years ago. Whatever the truth may be, 4 lives were forever lost on that stormy afternoon, leaving an unforgettable pain in everyone's hearts. This case not only brought endless sorrow to the victim's family, but also served as a warning to society, reminding everyone to cherish what they have and avoid falling into the abyss of greed and desire. Don't let a moment of impulse lead to an irreversible tragedy. That wraps up today's video. See you all in the next one. Goodbye.